Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. The next day, Mark sat at his small kitchen table, staring down at the folder Eleanor had left him with. The weight of the decision hung heavily in the air, and his mind raced with questions. Could he really go through with this? The thought of marrying a woman he barely knew, a woman offering a lifeline to his drowning family, felt like a betrayal of everything he had ever stood for. But the alternative was more terrifying, losing everything his father had worked for, his family's future in jeopardy. He rubbed his hands over his face, trying to process the gravity of what he was considering. He had always believed in doing things the right way, earning everything he had through hard work and perseverance. But now, that path felt closed off to him. Mark knew his law degree wouldn't save him. It wouldn't pay off his father's debts or keep the family home from slipping through his fingers. The cold reality of the situation was undeniable. He needed to make a choice, and fast. Later that afternoon, Mark found himself back at the bistro, the same spot where he had met Eleanor the night before. The rain had stopped, and the sky was a muted gray, the streets wet from the downpour. He walked inside, the door chimes ringing softly as he entered. Eleanor was already seated at their usual table, her silver hair gleaming in the soft light. She didn't look surprised to see him, as if she had known he would come. She looked up from her phone with a calm expression. "Mr. Davis," she said, her voice cool but welcoming, "I'm glad you decided to return." She gestured to the chair across from her, and Mark took a seat, the tension in his shoulders palpable. He wasn't sure what he was expecting from this meeting, but it certainly wasn't the calm certainty that Eleanor exuded. It was as if she had already won. "I've thought about it," Mark said, his voice low. Eleanor didn't interrupt, simply waiting for him to continue. "I can't deny that my situation is desperate. And I understand that this offer is my best shot. But I need to know more. This is a huge step, and I can't make it lightly." Eleanor nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "Of course," she replied. "You deserve to know exactly what you're getting into. This marriage will be a business arrangement first and foremost. I need a partner, someone to help me secure my legacy, but I also need someone who can play the part in the public eye. Our relationship will be strictly professional. No emotions involved." Mark hesitated, feeling a pit in his stomach. The coldness of her words hit him harder than he had expected. He had been hoping for some small sign that this would be more than just a contract, but the more he heard, the more it seemed like it was exactly what she had promised, a transaction. He was about to ask more questions when Eleanor spoke again. "I know this is a lot to take in, Mark," she said, her tone softening just a touch. "But I'm offering you a chance to rebuild. To give your family a future, to give yourself a future. I won't ask anything more from you than what's necessary to fulfill our agreement." Mark took a deep breath, his mind racing again. This was it. His way out. His way to save his family. The future was right in front of him, wrapped up in a contract he could barely comprehend. "And you?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "What do you get out of all this? You're offering me everything. What do I give you in return?" Eleanor's lips curled into a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I gain control," she said simply. "I need a partner to help solidify my legacy. Someone who will be by my side in public, someone to help protect my family's empire. But don't worry about me, Mark. This isn't about love. It's about security. For both of us. There was a long silence between them, the air thick with the weight of the decision he was about to make. Eleanor sat back in her chair, her posture composed and confident, as if she had already prepared herself for whatever choice Mark would make. Mark finally stood up, his decision clear. "All right, Eleanor," he said, his voice steady. "I'll do it. I'll marry you." His heart was pounding, but there was a sense of relief that washed over him, as if he had finally taken control of his future. Eleanor stood as well, a glimmer of approval in her eyes. "Good," she said simply. "We'll begin the preparations immediately. There's no time to waste." As Mark walked out of the bistro, he felt a strange sense of calm. He had made the choice. It wasn't the path he would have chosen for himself, but it was the only one left. Now, he would have to live with the consequences and the life he had just agreed to build. Mark didn't know what the future would bring, but one thing was certain: his life was about to change forever. The days following Mark's decision to marry Eleanor were a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings, and rushed preparations. The weight of his choice settled deeper with each passing moment, but he couldn't afford to back out now. His family's future was on the line, and this was the only way to secure it. Eleanor had already made arrangements for the wedding, and despite the cold, businesslike nature of their arrangement, she had made it clear that nothing would be left to chance. Mark was sitting in his small apartment, his head buried in a stack of legal documents, when his phone buzzed. The screen lit up with Eleanor's name, and for a moment, he hesitated before answering. "Mark," Eleanor's voice came through, calm as always, but with a hint of urgency. "I need you to come to the office tomorrow at 9 a.m. We have some final details to discuss before the wedding. I want everything to go smoothly." The last part sounded more like a command than a request, but Mark was used to it by now. He had no room to question her. "I'll be there," he said, his voice resigned. The next morning, Mark found himself at the towering glass building that housed Eleanor's company, Carter Enterprises. It felt like a world apart from his own life, a world of polished suits, gleaming floors, and people who moved with purpose. Eleanor's assistant greeted him at the lobby, leading him into her office, which was just as pristine as the building itself. Eleanor was standing by the window, looking out over the city, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. "Good morning, Mark," she said without turning around. "Please, have a seat." He sat down in the chair across from her, feeling out of place in this world of wealth and power. He had never been one to be comfortable in such environments, but he reminded himself that this was the price of securing his family's future. "I know this is all happening fast," Eleanor continued, still gazing out the window. "But I want you to understand what you're stepping into. This marriage isn't just about a piece of paper. It's about the image we will project to the world. You're not just marrying me, you're becoming part of my empire." Mark nodded, though the reality of her words still felt like a distant echo in his mind. "I get it," he said quietly. "It's just, everything is happening so quickly. I don't know what to expect." He felt his nerves begin to show, but Eleanor didn't seem fazed by them. She turned to face him, her eyes steady. "I understand," she replied. "But this isn't a fairy tale. We both know that. You're here because you need this, and I'm offering you a chance to rebuild your life, to be part of something much bigger than yourself. All I ask is that you play your part, and that includes understanding the public image we'll create. We can't afford mistakes, Mark. Not in this world." Her tone softened slightly as she continued. "Do you understand?" Mark took a deep breath, his mind swirling with the gravity of the situation. "I understand," he said, his voice steady now. He had made this decision. He had chosen this path, and there was no turning back. "I'll do whatever it takes." Eleanor gave him a small nod, her expression softening ever so slightly. "Good," she said, her voice taking on a more businesslike edge again. "Now, we have one final detail to discuss. The wedding will be tomorrow night. I've arranged everything. I want you to be prepared to make your debut as my husband. She handed him a folder, the same kind of folder she had given him the first time they met. Inside, there were details about the event, about the guests, and about the expectations. I'll see you there. She said it as though it was already a done deal, and for Mark, it was. The time for second guessing was over. As Mark walked out of the building, the weight of the decision he had made pressed down on him even more. Tomorrow, he would marry Eleanor. It was a union that would change the course of his life, a marriage that had nothing to do with love, but everything to do with survival. He couldn't help but wonder what life would be like after the wedding, if he could ever truly fit into this world of wealth and power, or if he would always feel like an outsider. The night of the wedding arrived quickly. Mark stood in front of the mirror in the hotel room where he had been staying, adjusting his tuxedo. He hardly recognized the man staring back at him. The man in the mirror was polished, poised, and ready to step into a world he didn't belong to. He wondered briefly if Eleanor ever felt like an outsider, or if this world was just as natural to her as breathing. The wedding ceremony was held in a grand ballroom, the lights sparkling above them like stars. It was every bit as extravagant as Eleanor had promised, and more. The guests were a who's who of the city's elite business moguls, celebrities, and influential politicians. But for Mark, it all felt like a dream he was just watching from the outside. The vows they exchanged were short, formal, and devoid of any emotion, a stark contrast to the lavish setting and the grandiose celebration that followed. As the night wore on, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. He wasn't sure what it was, but there was a subtle shift in the air. He had married Eleanor, yes, but somewhere in the back of his mind, he wondered if this arrangement could ever lead to something more, something he hadn't expected. Little did Mark know, the biggest surprises were yet to come. The days after the wedding passed by in a blur of gala events, meetings, and public appearances. Mark was getting used to his new life as Eleanor's husband, but something about the arrangement still felt off. It was a marriage of convenience, no love involved, but the moments between him and Eleanor started to feel different. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was, in her own way, paying attention to him more than he had expected. Every now and then, he would catch her looking at him across a room, her gaze lingering just a little longer than necessary. Was it curiosity? Or was it something else? He couldn't tell. He didn't know if he was reading too much into it, but he began to wonder if this arrangement could ever evolve into something more than just a business deal. It was on one of those nights, at another lavish charity event, that Mark first realized how far removed he was from the life he had once known. He had been introduced to countless influential people, but no one seemed to see him for anything other than the wealthy man's new husband. He felt like a prop, a display piece meant to fit in Eleanor's world but never truly be part of it. At the gala, Eleanor was mingling with her guests, the center of attention as always, while Mark stood off to the side, holding a glass of wine, watching the scene unfold. As the evening wore on, Eleanor approached him, her smile polite but cool. "Mark," she said, her voice low enough for only him to hear, "we need to talk." He followed her into a quieter area of the ballroom, away from the hustle and bustle of the event. Eleanor closed the door behind them, and for the first time since their wedding, Mark saw her vulnerability. "Is everything all right?" Mark asked, a little unsure of what was happening. Eleanor had always been composed, but tonight there was something different about her. For a moment, she hesitated, and Mark could see the faintest flicker of doubt in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, then stopped, as if weighing her words. "It's just. I've been wondering how long you plan to keep up this charade," Eleanor finally said, her voice soft but edged with an underlying tension. Mark blinked, taken aback by the question. He had expected her to be a little distant, but not like this. "I know this isn't what either of us expected, but we've been pretending long enough. I need you to make a choice, Mark. You can't keep acting like a stranger in your own life." Mark's heart began to race. This wasn't what he had imagined when he agreed to the marriage. The deal was supposed to be straightforward, a business arrangement, no strings attached. But now, as Eleanor spoke, he realized how much his presence, his participation, meant to her. There was a weight in her words, and for the first time, he felt like he was more than just a pawn in her plan. "What do you mean?" Mark asked, his voice low, his confusion showing. Eleanor took a step closer, her expression softening as she met his gaze. "I mean," she began, "that we've both been living in this bubble. A bubble where everything is business and nothing is real. But we need to start being real with each other, Mark. You're not just my husband for show anymore. I can't keep pretending that nothing is happening between us. I need to know where we stand." Mark stood still, the air between them thick with unsaid words. It was clear now that their marriage, though born from necessity, had begun to evolve in ways neither of them had anticipated. Mark wasn't sure what to say. He had been so focused on the financial aspect of the deal that he hadn't given much thought to what was happening emotionally. But now, in this quiet moment with Eleanor, he felt a shift within himself. His feelings were changing. He wasn't sure when it had happened, but the idea of this being just a business deal was starting to feel like a lie. He took a step toward her, his eyes meeting hers. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "I never expected any of this. I came into this marriage thinking it was just a way to solve my problems, to secure my family's future. But now, I don't know. Something's changed. I've changed." For the first time, Eleanor's face softened, her guarded exterior cracking just enough for Mark to see a glimpse of the woman behind the business mask. She took a deep breath and nodded slowly. "I understand," she whispered. "I didn't expect it either. But now we have to figure out what this is. What we are. And what comes next." The conversation left both of them standing in a tense silence. The ballroom outside carried on with the celebration, but in that small, private room, Mark felt like his world had shifted in a way he couldn't fully explain. He didn't know what this would mean for their marriage, whether it would ever become something more than just an arrangement. But as he stood there, looking into Eleanor's eyes, he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't keep pretending that nothing had changed. The night continued, but for Mark, the gala was now just a distant hum. The future seemed uncertain, but he couldn't deny that he had crossed a line. Whatever came next would not be simple, but it would be real. The days following their conversation felt like an emotional roller coaster for Mark. It had only been a few days since that pivotal moment in the ballroom, yet everything seemed to have changed. Eleanor had left him with many questions and no clear answers. They still went through the motions of their marriage, attending events, meeting with clients, playing their parts, but the underlying tension between them was undeniable. Every time Mark caught a glimpse of Eleanor, there was something different in the way she looked at him, a subtle shift that left him wondering if she, too, was questioning the nature of their relationship. One evening, after another long day of meetings, Mark returned to the lavish penthouse that Eleanor had arranged for them. He wasn't used to the opulence that surrounded him, but somehow, it had started to feel like home. As he entered the apartment, he found Eleanor sitting by the large window, looking out over the city's skyline. The setting sun cast a warm glow across the room, making her silhouette appear almost ethereal. He hesitated for a moment before approaching her. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low but firm. "We need to talk. About us." She turned to look at him, her eyes steady as she took in his words. There was no surprise in her expression, as if she had been waiting for this conversation, too. "I know," she replied, her voice calm, almost too calm. "We've been avoiding it long enough. But I'll admit, I've been thinking about it. About us." She paused, her gaze softening as she looked at him. "This is more than I expected, Mark. It's more than I thought I could handle. And it's more than I've ever let myself believe." Mark walked closer, standing beside her by the window, looking out at the vast city below. He wasn't sure what to expect from her words, but something inside him felt a stirring sense of hope he hadn't allowed himself to feel before. "I know what you mean," he said quietly. "I came into this thinking I was just helping my family survive. But it's not just about survival anymore. I don't know when it happened, but I've started to care. And I don't want to keep pretending that this is just a business arrangement. He turned to face her, his heart pounding. I'm not sure what this is, Eleanor. But I want to find out. I want to give this a real chance. I can't keep pretending like I don't have feelings for you. There was a long silence between them as Eleanor absorbed his words. Her eyes searched his face, as if looking for something, or perhaps testing him. Mark felt his chest tighten, unsure of what to expect next. He had exposed his feelings, and now all he could do was wait for her response. Finally, Eleanor spoke. I've been holding back for a long time, Mark. I've never let anyone get close to me. Not like this. I built this life, this empire, and I thought I could keep it all separate. But now. She paused, her voice softening. I don't know. I didn't expect to feel this way either. She looked away briefly, as if gathering her thoughts before meeting his gaze again. Maybe we're both scared, she continued, her voice quieter now. Maybe I've been afraid of letting someone in. But you're right. We can't keep going on like this, pretending that nothing has changed. I don't know what happens next, but I think I'm ready to take a step forward. Together. Mark felt a wave of relief wash over him as her words sank in. They were still standing in the same place, separated by only a few inches, but the distance between them had never felt smaller. For the first time, he realized that they both wanted the same thing, something real, something genuine, even if they didn't know how to get there yet. He reached out slowly, taking her hand in his. Then let's figure it out, he said, his voice steady, but filled with conviction. Together. No more pretending. Eleanor looked at their joined hands, a small smile tugging at her lips. Together, she repeated softly, and for the first time, Mark truly believed it. The following weeks were a mix of new beginnings and old habits. Eleanor and Mark began to navigate their evolving relationship, finding moments of connection amidst the whirlwind of their high-profile lives. They spent quiet evenings talking about everything and nothing, slowly learning to trust each other not just as business partners or husband and wife, but as two people who had begun to care deeply for each other. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, and their pasts were not easily forgotten. But they had taken the first step toward honesty, toward real emotions, and most importantly, toward a future they could build together. The weight of their previous arrangement still loomed over them, but for the first time, it didn't feel like the only thing that defined their relationship. Mark couldn't help but smile to himself as he looked at Eleanor one evening, watching her laugh at something he had said. It wasn't the life he had imagined, but for the first time, he was starting to think it might be the life he had always needed. Little did they both know, this was just the beginning of a deeper journey, one filled with unexpected twists, but also with the possibility of true love. In the weeks that followed, Mark and Eleanor continued to navigate their unusual marriage, but this time, there was something different. It wasn't just about appearances anymore. Slowly, their connection deepened. They spent more time together outside the public eye, learning about each other's hopes, fears, and dreams. Eleanor, the woman who had always controlled every aspect of her life, began to open up to him in ways she never had before. Mark, for the first time, started to feel like more than just a pawn in her world. He was no longer just the husband by contract, was becoming someone who mattered to her. One night, as they sat in the quiet of their living room after a long day, Eleanor leaned back against the plush cushions of the couch, her eyes thoughtful. Mark, she began, her voice soft but steady, I've been thinking about the future. About us. Mark looked up from his book, meeting her gaze. He could see the uncertainty in her eyes, something that hadn't been there before. It made him wonder what she was really thinking. What do you mean? He asked, his voice gentle. I thought we were already figuring this out. I thought so too, she said, her lips curling into a faint smile. But we've been living in this bubble, haven't we? The world outside doesn't stop. And sooner or later, we'll have to decide what comes next. We've made progress, but I can't help but wonder if we're just playing it safe, hiding from what's real. She looked down at her hands for a moment before looking back at him. I need to know, Mark, do you think we could ever have something real? Mark's heart raced at the question. It wasn't something he had fully allowed himself to consider before, but now, with Eleanor looking at him like that, the possibility seemed real. He had spent so long trying to keep his emotions in check, focusing only on the practicalities of their situation, but something had shifted, something undeniable that made him wonder if there could be more to this marriage than what he had first believed. He set the book down and turned his full attention to her. "I don't know what the future holds, Eleanor," he said, his voice low, "but I do know one thing. I'm not the same person I was when I walked into this. And I think there's a chance for something more between us." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I care about you. I've always cared about you, but I've been too afraid to admit it. I don't want to just be part of your world, I want to be with you. As your husband, not just as a business partner." Eleanor's eyes softened, and she reached out to take his hand, her fingers warm against his skin. "Mark," she breathed the name like it was something new, something she was only just starting to understand. "I never expected to hear you say that. I've spent so long building this empire, building walls around my heart to protect myself. I thought that love and all these emotions were things I could control. But now, I don't know." She squeezed his hand, the gesture simple but meaningful. "Maybe it's time I stopped pretending. Maybe it's time we both stopped pretending." The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of the city outside. The weight of their words hung in the air, heavy but hopeful. For the first time, they weren't just two people bound by circumstance, they were two people on the edge of something real. Mark wasn't sure what would come next, but he knew that this moment, this conversation, had changed everything. The barriers they had once built between them, for the sake of appearances and practicality, were starting to crumble. As the evening wore on, they talked more about their hopes, their fears, and the future they both envisioned. It was a conversation that neither of them had been brave enough to have until now. And as Mark looked at Eleanor, the woman who had once been an untouchable enigma, he realized that she was no longer just a mystery to be solved. She was someone he could truly see a future with. The next morning, as they stood in the bright, sunny light of the penthouse, Eleanor turned to Mark with a look of determination in her eyes. "I think we're ready," she said, her voice filled with certainty. "We're ready to take the next step, together." Mark smiled, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. And for the first time, it wasn't about a contract or a business deal. It was about something deeper, something worth fighting for. As they walked out the door, side by side, the future stretched out before them, full of possibilities. No longer bound by the past, they were free to define what their relationship could be. Whatever happened next, they knew they would face it together. As the weeks passed, things between Mark and Eleanor began to change. Their relationship, once based solely on necessity, had blossomed into something more profound. They began to spend more time together outside of their public appearances. Conversations flowed more easily now, their exchanges no longer mechanical or forced. They shared laughter, dreams, and even moments of vulnerability. Eleanor, the woman who had built her empire with calculated precision, began to show a side of herself Mark had never seen before, a side that was raw and human. Mark, too, found himself letting down his guard, revealing parts of himself he had long buried. They were no longer just strangers living under the same roof. They were partners, learning to navigate this new chapter of their lives. But with change came uncertainty. As they grew closer, Eleanor's past one she had kept locked away for so long began to catch up with her. There were moments when Mark would catch her lost in thought, staring out the window, her expression distant. She seemed almost haunted by something, and despite their growing connection, she was still holding back in ways Mark couldn't quite understand. One evening, as they sat in the living room of their penthouse, Mark noticed that Eleanor seemed particularly withdrawn. She had been quiet all evening, absent-mindedly flipping through a magazine while he tried to focus on a report. It was unlike her to be so distant, and he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was wrong. "Eleanor," he said, his voice gentle but insistent. "What's going on? You've been quiet all night." Eleanor looked up, her eyes meeting his. There was a flicker of something regret, perhaps, or fear, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She set the magazine down on the coffee table and took a deep breath. "It's nothing, really," she said, but the words didn't sound convincing. Mark could tell there was more she wasn't saying, and he wasn't about to let it go. "Eleanor," he pressed. "We've been through so much together. You don't have to keep things from me." She hesitated, the weight of his words sinking in. For a long moment, she remained silent, her gaze drifting to the floor. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking a lot about the past, about my family. About everything I've done to get here. The truth is, Mark, I've always been alone. I built this empire on my own, and I've always kept my distance from people. I thought I could control everything, my career, my image, even my feelings. But with you, things are different. And that scares me." Mark felt a wave of empathy wash over him. He could see now that Eleanor's walls weren't just about keeping people at arm's length. They were about survival. She had spent so long guarding herself from the world that even now, in their marriage, she was struggling to fully open up. He reached across the table and gently took her hand in his. "Eleanor," he said softly, "I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to be afraid. You don't have to carry all of this alone anymore." For the first time in a long while, Eleanor allowed herself to show vulnerability. She squeezed his hand, her grip tight with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm just scared that I'll lose everything I've worked for. I've always been afraid that if I let someone in, it will all come crashing down. And then what do I have left?" Mark didn't hesitate. "You'll have me. And you'll have the future we're building together. This isn't just about your empire, Eleanor. It's about us, about what we create together. And I promise you, no matter what happens, we'll face it as a team." Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. It was the first time Mark had seen her truly open up, and it struck him deeply. She wasn't just the formidable woman he had married, she was someone who had carried the weight of the world on her shoulders for far too long. And now, with him, she was beginning to let go. The moment was quiet, intimate, and for the first time, it felt like they were on equal ground. No longer a business arrangement, no longer a calculated move, they were partners, with everything to lose and everything to gain. And Mark knew that, no matter how hard it got, he was ready to face it all with her by his side. Little did they know, this moment of honesty would be the catalyst for even bigger changes. They had taken the first step toward building a future together, but there were still many hurdles ahead. Yet, for the first time, they both felt ready to tackle them, hand in hand. As Mark and Eleanor continued to navigate their growing connection, the world around them seemed to shift in unexpected ways. Their marriage, which had once felt like nothing more than a business arrangement, was slowly blossoming into something real. They spent more time together, talking, laughing, and sharing moments that were completely different from the rigid structure of their past lives. Mark began to see Eleanor in a new light, no longer just the powerful CEO, but a woman with vulnerabilities, hopes, and fears. And Eleanor, in turn, began to trust Mark in ways she had never allowed herself before. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough for them for now. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony of their penthouse, the city lights twinkling below them, Eleanor turned to Mark with a thoughtful expression on her face. "Mark," she began, her voice softer than usual, "I've been thinking about what you said about the future we're building together." Mark looked at her, the hint of a smile on his lips, but there was something in her tone that made him pause. He set his glass down and leaned forward slightly, sensing the gravity of her words. "What about it?" he asked, his voice steady. Eleanor hesitated for a moment, her eyes drifting to the horizon before meeting his gaze again. "I think we need to take a risk," she said, her voice firm with determination. "We've been playing it safe, living in this bubble of comfort. But if we're really going to make this work, if we're really going to have a future together, we need to stop holding back. We need to trust each other completely, no more walls, no more secrets. I want us to truly build something together." Mark felt a surge of emotion as he listened to her words. For so long, he had been living in a world of uncertainty, trying to keep his family afloat, unsure of where he truly belonged. But here, with Eleanor, he was starting to believe that maybe just maybe he had found something worth fighting for. He reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "You're right," he said, his voice soft but filled with resolve. "We've spent too much time being afraid, hiding behind all the things that separate us. I don't want that anymore. I want us to take that step forward, Eleanor. No more playing it safe. I'm ready for whatever comes next, as long as we're in it together." For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if the weight of their words had settled in, and in that silence, something shifted between them. Eleanor's lips curled into a small, genuine smile, one that reached her eyes, softening the sharp edge that had always been present. She leaned in slightly, her voice quiet but filled with emotion. "I never thought I'd be here," she whispered, "with you. I didn't think I'd ever let anyone in again, after everything. But I'm glad I did. I'm glad it's you." Mark felt his heart swell with affection as he squeezed her hand gently. "We're in this together, Eleanor. And we'll make it work. No matter what." The night stretched on, the city below them bustling with life, but in that moment, everything felt still. For the first time in a long while, Mark and Eleanor weren't just two people bound by a contract, they were two people, united by choice, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. The walls between them had been torn down, and in their place was something stronger: trust, understanding, and a love that had grown in ways neither of them had expected. The journey ahead would not be easy. There were still obstacles to face, still challenges to overcome, but as they sat together on the balcony, looking out at the future, Mark knew that this was the start of something real. They were no longer hiding behind pretense. They were building something that would last. For the first time, Mark and Eleanor felt like they were exactly where they needed to be. Months passed, and with each passing day, Mark and Eleanor's relationship grew stronger. The foundation they had built together, from a marriage of convenience to something much more real, had begun to solidify. They were no longer just two people living in the same house, they were a team, facing the world together. Eleanor had opened up more than she ever had before, and Mark, too, had allowed himself to trust in something beyond survival. They had gone through so much, yet now they were building something that felt like it could withstand anything. One evening, as they sat together in their penthouse, enjoying a quiet dinner, just the two of them, Mark looked at Eleanor, his heart full. She had changed so much since that first meeting, when she had offered him a life preserver in the form of a marriage contract. And now, looking at her across the table, he realized how far they had come, not just in their marriage, but in their lives. "You know, Eleanor," he began, his voice calm but filled with emotion, "I never imagined this is where I'd end up. A year ago, I would have never believed that I'd be sitting here with you, not just as your husband, but as someone who actually means something to you." He paused, taking a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. Eleanor looked up at him, a soft smile playing on her lips. "I never thought I'd be here either, Mark," she said, her voice tender. "But I'm glad I am. I'm glad it's with you." She reached across the table, taking his hand in hers, her touch warm and reassuring. Mark squeezed her hand gently, the weight of her words sinking in. There were no more barriers between them, no more walls to hide behind. They had come through everything: the awkward beginning, the misunderstandings, the uncertainties, and had found something stronger. Their connection was no longer based on what they needed from each other, but on what they shared and built together. "We've been through a lot," Mark continued, his voice steady. "But I think we're finally getting it right. Together." He smiled, a genuine smile that reflected everything he had come to feel for Eleanor. This is real. And I wouldn't trade it for anything." Eleanor smiled back, her eyes filled with warmth. "I never thought I would need anyone. I spent so many years building my life, my business, my empire. But now, I see that all of it means nothing without love, without someone to share it with." She paused, looking down at their intertwined hands before meeting his gaze again. "And I'm glad that someone is you, Mark. The room felt warm, their bond growing even stronger as they shared this moment of quiet realization. Eleanor had spent so many years protecting herself, her heart guarded against the world. But with Mark, she had allowed herself to let go of the walls she had so carefully built. And Mark, who had once been driven by necessity, had found something worth more than survival, had found love. As the night wore on, they sat together, sharing stories, dreams, and laughter. Their world had changed in ways neither of them had expected, but in this moment, it didn't matter. The future was still unknown, but they were no longer afraid of it. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Mark and Eleanor had built a life that was real. And for the first time, they both knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. And as they sat side by side, looking out at the city lights, they knew that no matter what happened next, their journey together had only just begun.